My daughter is with her grandmother, so don't worry and just focus on your treatment. After an unexpected accident, I was forced into a hospital stay, unable to go pick up my daughter myself. My husband told me not to worry because he had left our daughter with his mother. As soon as I was discharged, I went to my in-laws' house to pick her up. Granddaughter? I don't know what you're talking about. Didn't my son say he would take care of her and took her back? But I definitely left her with you, Mom. Why would you say such a lie? What's going on? You've never taken care of children before. There's no way you could balance work and childcare. Wait, calm down. My husband, who had started to panic, turned pale at the sight of someone who had just returned home and fled in haste. The person who appeared was known to be my husband's nemesis, marking the beginning of his downfall. I married my husband, a co-worker at the same company. 2 years after I joined, a new project started, and both my husband and I were part of it. Our relationship evolved from professional to romantic, and we got married 3 years later. For a while, we both worked, but it was deemed inappropriate for a married couple to be in the same department, so I was transferred to another. I had to abandon the skills I had honed and learn new things from scratch. Just when I was starting to feel comfortable in my new role, I found out I was pregnant and decided to quit my job to become a full-time homemaker. My husband had always said he wanted children soon after getting married. I also wanted to have children in my 20s. However, we didn't actively try for a baby, let the nature take its own course. As we had hoped, I got pregnant and gave birth. We often heard it would be nice to have a girl first, and I was thrilled when our baby was indeed a girl. I felt a growing sense of motherhood, looking forward to raising our child together with my husband. However, my husband was different. Despite his earlier eagerness for children, he showed little interest once our daughter was born. He never participated in childcare, leaving me to raise our daughter alone. The only consolation was that he never got irritated by the baby's night crying. We lived in the same area as my in-laws. I had wanted to live near my parents, but it was inconvenient for commuting, so we reluctantly settled here. Although I had been anxious about my relationship with my in-laws, interacting with them turned out to be easier than expected. Considering the common stories of disputes, I could say my relationship with my in-laws was good. My mother-in-law was a very straightforward person, the type to speak her mind almost immediately. Because she often spoke without considering how her words would be received or felt, I sometimes found myself puzzled by the meaning behind her words. My father-in-law was a man whose motto seemed to be purity and righteousness. He always tried to act considering others' positions and despised anyone who acted against his beliefs. However, when it came to my daughter, he would completely soften up. He wasn't just indulgent, he was a person full of humanity who would educate her while praising her to the skies whenever she did something good as a person. Yet, my husband seemed to view his father with fear, maintaining distance and preferring to avoid any interaction if possible. As my daughter turned 2, my husband's job became busier. Due to a transfer to another department. Using his busyness as an excuse, he became even more distant from our daughter. At 2 years old, she was curious about everything, and if you took your eyes off her for a moment, you couldn't be sure what she would get into. I wasn't asking my husband to spend hours on end with our daughter. I just wanted him to keep her company while I cooked or during the brief times I bathed. However, my husband insisted that as the family's breadwinner, he needed his rest and wouldn't listen. Having my husband lounging around at home only increased my workload, leaving me exhausted from taking care of both our daughter and him. I looked forward to our daughter's growth, thinking it would be exciting to see what comes next, which kept me going. But with my husband, there was no growth to anticipate, and the lack of any expectations only made my tiredness accumulate. Amidst all this, my husband's affair came to light. The trigger was lipstick on his dress shirt. Knowing he commuted on crowded trains, it wouldn't have been strange if the lipstick came from there. If he had used that as an excuse, I probably would have let it slide without suspecting an affair, thinking, it can't be helped. However, he acted suspiciously just from my asking, "What's this lipstick from?" His expression immediately became strained, his eyes darted around, and he could only open and close his mouth without saying anything meaningful. "I can't believe I'm asking this, but are you cheating?" "No, it was just a moment of folly. Someone from a company I work with took me to a club. And then," he said, "he got drunk at a high-end club and, next thing he knew, he spent the night in a hotel room with a woman who works there. While I understand that it's her job to be nice to customers like my husband to some extent, sharing a bed and developing a romantic relationship indicates it might have been serious beyond work." My husband, albeit regretful and shrinking in guilt, apologized, so I decided to forgive him this one time, setting conditions. I thought about how, being a stay-at-home mom with a young daughter, divorcing would only make things harder for her. "But if something like this happens again, we're getting a divorce. And I'll demand twice the amount in alimony, including for this time." "Understood. I'll take it to heart. I won't betray you ever again." My husband, perhaps wanting to mend things further, started showering our daughter, who he had previously shown little interest in, with smiles and suggested they play together. It seemed forced and silly to me, but I went along with it, hoping this might encourage him to spend more time with her. "Look at that, sweetie. Daddy wants to play with you." My daughter was initially surprised, but soon climbed onto his lap, begging him to read her a picture book. I was momentarily moved by this scene I had longed to see, only for him to get up a few minutes later, claiming he needed to run to the convenience store, and left without looking back. After that, I never saw him interact with our daughter again. In the end, my husband had no interest in our child, and I was left to single-handedly manage the childcare. Days turned into a routine where my husband was always too busy with work, and his time at home was minimal. As for the affair, I decided not to dwell on suspicions. If he said he was working, I chose to believe him, thinking any lies would eventually come out. Especially since I kept in touch with some colleagues from before I quit my job. My husband knew this, so I figured he wouldn't dare lie about something that could easily be uncovered. Then, one day, I had an unavoidable appointment and couldn't take my daughter with me. I decided to use drop-in daycare, despite the offers from my in-laws to help without hesitation. I feared becoming too reliant on them. I wished my husband would participate more in parenting so I could feel more comfortable asking his parents for help. As I left my daughter at the daycare, she started fussing, not wanting to be apart from me. She's lively and a bit restless. But then she always wanted to stay by my side. The daycare staff managed to distract her with her favorite books and toys, allowing me to leave. I hurried to finish my errands, trying to pick up my daughter as soon as possible. Little did I know, a shocking incident was about to unfold. Just as I heard someone behind me yell, "Watch out," my consciousness abruptly cut off. The next thing I knew, I was lying in a hospital bed. A runaway car had crashed into the building I was in, causing a major accident that involved several employees and customers. I had become one of the injured customers. That's what the nurse explained to me when I regained consciousness. My first thought after understanding my situation was of my daughter. The nurse told me all my belongings were collected and stored in a cupboard. I tried to get up to fetch my phone from my purse, but the mere act of sitting up sent intense pain throughout my body. I asked the nurse to get my phone for me, and I contacted my husband. Thinking it would be bad to call him during work, I sent an email instead, but I was restless until he replied. His response came somewhat late, just a single word, "No problem." The brevity and lack of warmth in his reply only heightened my anxiety. Not just about my daughter. He didn't ask about the accident or how I was injured at all. I later found out it was quite a major accident, significant enough to make the news. The driver was a young person doing something dangerous, and even though I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, the police came to question me at the hospital. I thought about sneaking out to check on my daughter, but I couldn't even get out of bed on my own. My husband came just once for my admission paperwork and to bring me a change of clothes, but hasn't visited since. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't stop, and when I tried contacting my husband multiple times, he said our daughter was already asleep, or that my mother-in-law was taking good care of her and enjoying her company, so I shouldn't disturb them. When I asked if we could talk on the phone because I wanted to discuss something with him, he refused, saying he was tired from juggling work and unfamiliar childcare tasks, and that phone calls would break his concentration. However, he did reply to about 20% of the emails I sent, albeit in very short and terse responses. If I sent a series of long emails, he'd snap at me to make my messages clearer and shorter, saying he didn't have time to read emails and not to send unnecessary ones. Afterward, my doctor said he wanted to talk with me and a family member together. I asked my husband to come, but he rebuffed me, saying he should prioritize childcare and that I could handle it alone. By this time, I had become unable to say anything to my husband, who used inexperienced childcare as an excuse for everything. I felt guilty for making him take care of our daughter because I was injured. Eventually, I recovered enough that my doctor said I could be discharged after the next checkup if there were no problems. My husband had only brought me a change of clothes once, so I had been rotating through those, meaning I had minimal luggage when leaving the hospital. For anything I lacked, I used the hospital's rentals. I took the taxi to the store near our house. Then I spotted my husband, who was supposed to be at work, walking in being affectionate with a young woman. This young woman was his affair partner, the same one who had left lipstick on his dress shirt before. It seemed absurd to hide and pretend I hadn't seen them. Approaching my husband as if it were the most natural thing in the world, I asked, "What are you doing here? And who might this be?" Even though I knew she was the affair partner, I pretended not to know. "I'm here for work." "This person is someone from work." His voice was clearly nervous. Without pointing that out, I briefly nodded at the woman and asked my husband about our daughter. He made a strained excuse, saying everything was fine and that he had put our daughter in daycare for the day. Normally, one would say they use daycare while working, implying it was a regular arrangement. But my husband specifically said, "today." That made me wonder about all the other days. Holding back my urge to confront him, I pretended to have heard from my mother-in-law. I was mistaken. "She's with my mom." He brazenly reassured me everything was fine. Meanwhile, the affair partner seemed confused, tugging at my husband's arm, trying to understand what was going on. However, the inclusion of words like mother-in-law and daughter in our conversation made it clear to the affair partner that my husband was married. She became assertive after initially pulling at my husband's arm hesitantly. Her first words were, "You lied to me." Summarizing their argument, it appeared my husband had pretended to be unmarried while dating this woman. Shockingly, he had not only dated her but had also promised marriage. He had even met her parents, scouted wedding venues, and behaved like an engaged couple, despite being a married man. "Give me back the time I spent dating you." "Don't say that. You had a good time, didn't you?" "What? If I knew you were married, I wouldn't have given you the time of day." They met by chance, sitting next to each other at a shop bar counter. The woman had just broken up with her boyfriend and was vulnerable. My husband took advantage of her weakened state to start the affair. The more I heard, the more the woman seemed like another victim. I suggested we exchange contact information, and she eagerly agreed, handing me her business card before leaving with tears in her eyes. I couldn't help but maliciously ask my husband, "Aren't you going to chase after her?" Should I chase after her in situations like this?" "Huh? I have no idea." Although I was being spiteful because I wanted to know if I was truly the one he cared about, I didn't expect him to respond with a question. Both the other woman and I had to wonder what we ever saw in him. I was filled with a desire to question my past self for agreeing to marry him. After that, my husband and I went home in silence. I wasn't foolish enough to make a scene with a marital dispute in public. But that didn't mean I had forgiven him or that my anger had subsided. Taking advantage of the situation, my husband began making self-serving statements. "I'm not in the wrong. I was keeping our promise, but that woman kept following me. She said she'd die if I didn't date her. You remembered our promise, then? So, this will be quick. If you cheat again, we're immediately getting a divorce, and the alimony will be double, including the amount from last time. Suddenly, my husband started to panic, claiming it was just a moment of weakness. He apologized profusely, saying he was just lonely while I was in the hospital, but when you think about it calmly, he was blaming me. If he was lonely without me, he could have brought our daughter to visit. I realized discussing this just between the two of us wouldn't get us anywhere, so I suggested we go to his parents' house to have a conversation with his parents as mediators. Partly because I wanted to pick up our daughter as soon as possible. Upon arriving at my in-laws, my mother-in-law greeted us. "It seems like our granddaughter has been quite the burden on you." "Thank you." "So, where is she?" "Granddaughter? I haven't seen her in a month. What are you talking about?" My husband then started to panic even more, sweating profusely. "Don't joke around, Mom. I left her here before I went on a trip a month ago, remember? I said I'd need you to look after her for a month. Are you losing it? Don't you dare accuse your mother of dementia, you foolish son. So, you were supposed to be focusing on work and childcare this past month, right? What have you done with our precious daughter?" I questioned my husband with uncanny vigor. My husband, nearly in tears, kept insisting he hadn't lied, that it was my mother-in-law who was lying. "Should we go to the police and file a missing person report?" "Yes, we should." "Wait, I didn't do anything. I just went on a nice trip with her." My husband started rambling about things nobody asked, seemingly unaware he was confessing. Watching him made me feel both pitiful and ridiculous, so I turned my gaze elsewhere. That's when I saw the person I'd been longing to see outside the window and waved. As that person came closer, another figure became apparent. It was my father-in-law. He had sensed there might be trouble at home today and had taken our daughter out to keep her away from it. Seeing me for the first time in a month, my daughter eagerly walked towards me. She seemed to have been bought princess-like clothes by her father-in-law, and her gestures seemed somewhat precocious, as if she, too, was in a princess-like mood. Upon entering the room and seeing my husband, my father-in-law's demeanor instantly shifted to one filled with an intense aura. However, for my daughter's sake, he quickly reverted to his usual calm expression and handed her over to my mother-in-law. It seemed he was well aware of the storm that was about to unfold. My daughter gave me a puzzled look, wondering why I wasn't holding her, but I told her to play with Grandma for a bit, and I'd join them later. My mother-in-law then took over, starting to praise the dress my daughter was wearing. Pleased, my daughter's interest quickly shifted to her new outfit, and she moved to another room with my mother-in-law. Once they were out of sight, my father-in-law's expression turned serious again. My husband, noticing his father's glare, trembled with fear. Then, for some reason, he suddenly dashed out of the room and ran out of the house barefoot, clearly trying to escape. However, he was quickly caught by my father-in-law. Despite his age, he moved with surprising agility. I recalled hearing he had been involved in sports when he was younger, though I believe it was a sport where being fast wasn't necessarily the focus. You might wonder how it came to be that my in-laws and I were so in sync. The turning point was a call of rebuke from my mother-in-law about 3 weeks into my hospital stay. She chided me for leaving our daughter with her grandparents for 3 weeks, questioning my responsibilities as a mother. I was taken aback, having thought my husband had explained the situation to her. Panicking, I asked if she hadn't heard the circumstances from my husband. My son told me, "You are playing around and neglecting your child. He has decided to go on a sudden business trip and is not sure what to do with his grandchildren. I hear that you would like me to take care of your granddaughter if possible?" I was astonished to find out my husband had been lying so blatantly. I quickly explained to my mother-in-law what my husband had told me and the actual situation I was in. She was speechless for a moment, but then immediately apologized for misunderstanding and making such a terrible assumption without knowing the full story. Once our misunderstanding was cleared, the question remained, what was my husband actually doing behind my back? I told her I had a hunch and needed some time to confirm it before ending our call. Immediately afterward, I reached out to a former coworker. Though we were just teammates, this person had joined the company the same year as my husband. I still often consult with a woman who was like a big sister to everyone, even after she had left the job. While she hesitated to share due to privacy concerns, she sensed something was wrong and told me about my husband's schedule. According to her, he hadn't gone on a business trip but had taken a long vacation for a family trip instead. It seems he had been complaining to everyone that it was all my fault he had to suddenly take a long holiday. As a result, I ended up getting scolded by her. I won't ask for the reasons, but you worked at this company too, so you know how busy this period is, right? I'm not saying you can't go on a family trip, but couldn't you have just shifted the season a bit? Dealing with childcare and recovering from my injury, it seems my memory of my working days had faded. After she pointed it out, I checked the calendar and remembered that it indeed was a very busy period. My husband, being directly involved, should have known how inconvenient his long vacation would be for everyone else. So, why did he insist on going? I couldn't stop complaining to my former coworker over the phone, but I also wanted her to understand my side of the story. After hearing my explanation, she was so shocked that there was a moment of silence. She spoke again very solemnly, asking me to stay on the line while she checked something. A few minutes later, she told me she had found a reservation for two made right after I was admitted to the hospital. Right after you got admitted, he booked a trip for two. That means he knew about your hospitalization and didn't rush to your side but went on to book a trip. That's outrageous. My former coworker can be quite intimidating when angry. After spewing a lot of foul language belittling my husband, she told me that she would always be there to help. The next day, my doctor told me I could be discharged by the weekend if there were no problems in the next checkup. I relayed this to my mother-in-law, and we devised a plan to catch my husband red-handed. As per the doctor's declaration, my discharge was scheduled for the weekend, but I told my husband it would be the following week. It made him believe he had more time to enjoy his affair, which led to him being caught at the station. If he had attended the medical briefing with me, he would have known that the discharge date could be moved up. Don't run, you coward. If you have nothing to hide, there's no need to run, right? This is different. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Don't make excuses, liar. I don't want to believe anything you say. I thought you had changed and believed in not ending our relationship, yet you continued to cheat. I brought up the conditionally granted forgiveness from before and stated that it was time to enforce that promise. Immediate divorce, alimony doubled. I said it was non-negotiable. My husband blamed the woman for being clingy after the breakup, or threatening not to break up unless he took her on a trip, putting all the blame for his continued affair on the other woman. However, after being yelled at by my father-in-law to get his act together, my husband shrank away and became silent, unable to retort. The plan to discipline my husband worked better than I expected. Because my husband was more foolish than I imagined. His lies were exposed in broad daylight, and the impact spread far beyond what I anticipated. First, regarding my husband's affair partner, after exchanging several messages to verify my husband's claims. She provided evidence like photos taken with her family, pamphlets from wedding venue scouting, business cards from the staff who assisted them, and even details about trying on wedding dresses and viewing engagement rings. The more I heard, the more I saw her not as merely another woman involved in an affair but as another victim of my husband, just like me. I shared with her the lies my husband had told me, providing her with information. She had no intention of marrying a married man, let alone stealing someone's husband, now knowing the truth. She said she would return him to me, but I too didn't want him back. Eventually, my husband's affair partner decided to formally demand compensation for breaking off the engagement. Furthermore, her parents, outraged that their daughter was deceived by a heartless marriage scammer, filed a police report. By then, my divorce from my husband had been finalized, so no harm came to me or our daughter. The case of marriage fraud initiated by my husband was heading towards a settlement with a significant amount of alimony involved. However, I doubted my ex-husband could afford such a sum. My hunch was right, and he sought help from his parents' house. But his request was in vain. My ex-in-laws, disgusted by his actions, decided to cut ties with him. Even his workplace, which had been lenient up to this point, finally decided to take action. It appears he had already been problematic regarding his work attitude. Amidst this, he made personal trip reservations using the company's computer and took a long vacation without considering the timing, which could have been overlooked if it were for family. However, the affair and the suspicion of marriage fraud were too much to overlook. He was transferred to a department that's seen as a reserve for layoffs. The talk of his affair had spread even there, and he's constantly pointed at for his disgraceful actions, making his workplace unbearable. Still, he's stuck because he has to pay a hefty alimony over the coming years, leaving him unable to quit. He's reportedly gained a lot of weight due to stress and lost much of his hair, becoming unrecognizable. Amidst this, after a company health checkup revealed some serious issues, my ex-husband came crying to me, wanting me to be by his side at his end and pushing for reconciliation. I refused outright. When I warned him that I'd sue for stalking if he showed up again, he fled, trembling. It seems the police investigation for the marriage fraud accusation had left him terrified. I've moved closer to my parents' home, living modestly but happily with my daughter with their support. My relationship with my former in-laws continues at a healthy distance. They sometimes visit, showing great affection for my daughter, for which I'm very grateful.